So I'm going to be going through all the common faults and problems that you can expect to find on a PX Ford Ranger. So today I'm going to be doing a bit of a walk around video on this 2014 Ford Ranger and just going through all the common problems and faults that you can expect to find during your period of ownership, especially one with high kilometers on it. So this one has just clocked over 307,286 kilometers, and it has had its fair share of problems during that period, which I'm going to go into detail more about in this video. So this particular Ranger has had a full dealership service history. So up until about 140,000 kilometers, it's had basically all its services done. Some of them, most of them by Ford, but some of them by independent workshops. So I took ownership of it once it hit 141,000 kilometers. So as soon as it came out of the warranty period, that's when I took ownership of the car and have owned it ever since, up until 307,000 kilometers, which is the mileage that it has now. So the very first thing to fail on this car at about 165,000 kilometers was the EGR cooler. So the EGR cooler sits down the back of the engine and basically runs across the whole motor there, cooling the exhaust gases, and then it recirculates them back through this valve here. So basically what happened when the EGR cooler went on it is the coolant level dropped significantly and it started blowing white smoke out the exhaust. I was pretty fortunate to catch it pretty early. So the quick fix to this problem was an EGR cooler bypass. So all I did was insert a blanking plate in between the exhaust. Don't know if you can see that down the back there. So that blocked off all the gases. And then I took this rubber hose here and bypassed the cooler itself and reconnected it back down there again, which you probably can't see. But that was a quick and easy fix. I think it cost me somewhere around the vicinity of $40 all up, and maybe an hour's worth of work to do. So the next thing that went wrong on this Ford Ranger at about 200,000 kilometers was the intercooler itself. So probably can't see it, but anyway, it is down there. So basically what happened when the intercooler failed, the car went into limp mode, and basically you've got restricted power. I could also hear a slight louder whistling of the turbo, which sort of indicated that the intercooler had failed. So once again, cheap and easy fix on these. I think I picked one up on eBay for about $180. Took me about half an hour to install. Once I reset the fault code, the car was all good to go. So at about 210,000 kilometers, I replaced all the injectors. Now I only did that as a precautionary measure, so more so preventative maintenance. You could probably get more kilometers out of these, but a lot of the diesel mechanics recommend you sort of change them at about 200,000. Mine was still operating fine. I just thought it'd be a good idea to change them and just have a fresh set in there for the next 200,000 kilometers. So they were about $400 each to replace. So you got $1,600 there worth of injectors. And you just got to program them into the PCM itself, which you can do through a program called ForScan. So the next thing to fail on me at about the 240,000 kilometer mark was the actual linkage on the transmission come loose. So I'm going to have to climb underneath the car to show you this one. Don't know if you can see, but there's a bolt right there, right in front of me. There's a 10mm bolt on that linkage right there. And basically what happened, vibrated loose and caused me to lose 2nd, 4th and 6th gear while I was driving. So that was a pretty easy fix. All I did in that situation was basically find another bolt, Loctite it in, and it's been good ever since. So if you come across that problem where you lose 2nd, 4th and 6th, it's going to be the bolt that connects to that gear linkage there. So at about 260,000 kilometers, I had the starter motor start playing up on me. And your starter motor is basically located down here behind this rubber flap in through there. And basically what happened was there's a terminal on there. There's 2 terminals which are positive. One of those terminals had actually come loose, and it was just as simple as just tightening it up, and that was it. So how I noticed that was every time I tried to start it, it felt like it had a really weak sort of crank to it. And one day I had a guy sitting down here and he goes, "Oh, I just seen a spark come out from under the wheel arch there when you started the car up." And I got him to sit there and watch it, and we did it a couple of times, and he goes, "Oh, it's coming from the starter motor." And basically that's how I diagnosed that problem. Cheap and easy fix. Took me about 2 minutes to tighten it up, and ever since then the starter's been good. So at about 280,000 kilometers, I had the electronic turbo actuator fail on me, and that is located down there. It's buried underneath sort of that alternator, and anyway, it hangs off the turbo, so it's a form of electronic boost control for the turbo. And when that failed, the car went into limp mode. I basically connected up the computer, hooked up ForceScan, straight away it told me there was a problem with the turbo. So automatically I assumed, you know, it's got to be that actuator. Did a bit of research on the internet, and turns out it was the turbo actuator. A new one set me back, I think, $340 off eBay. It took about 5 hours to fit, because you do have to remove the catalytic converter in order to fit it, just because the position of it. It's probably easier to replace it if you got the turbo off. I didn't have the turbo off at the time, so for me, I had to actually dig through there and basically, you know, limited access. There's a couple of torque spits that you got to use to remove it. I think 3 torque spits, and the whole process, yeah, took about 5 hours. After it was complete, car started up and ran perfectly fine, and haven't had a problem with it ever since. So at 290,000 kilometers, I replaced the tappet cover gasket, and I do have a video on the whole process of removing the injectors and replacing that. I replaced it because it was leaking from around the sides and from where the injectors are as well. But, you know, at 290,000 kilometers, that can sort of be expected. Doesn't have any other oil leaks. That's the only oil leak that it's ever had, was just a tappet cover gasket. So yeah, that whole process took me about a day. So at 305,000 kilometers, the thermostat failed on me, which is there. Now, it didn't completely fail. It basically, all it was doing was, sometimes the temperature would sit at half, sometimes it'd sit on a quarter, and it was very irregular. So that pointed me straight to the thermostat. $30 from Ford, take about 5 minutes to put in. But as soon as I put that new one in, ever since then, it's just been sitting below half. So that fixed the problem. So now I'm going to just have a bit of a walk around the car and tell you all the stuff that I haven't replaced. So starting with the wheel bearings. All the wheel bearings are still all factory. Haven't touched any of the wheel bearings on the front or the rear. All the suspension components underneath are basically still all factory. The only thing that I've replaced, as you can see, are the aftermarket Bilstein coilovers and the upper control arms. Everything else is completely stock from the factory, untouched. That includes all the power steering rack, power steering pump, and all other associated components. All the tail shaft is all factory, untouched, as well as the gearbox. That's been untouched as well. It may have had a clutch replacement at some stage, but not while I've owned it. So I'm guessing sometime in its warranty period, it may have had a clutch replacement done. All the rear end here is all factory, untouched. I've never opened it up or, you know, changed the brake shoes or anything like that. Still all original. The rear differential is all still factory, untouched. I haven't touched it. I do regular services on it every sort of 80,000 kilometers, but never had to replace any components in the rear end whatsoever. Now the injector pump, which is located right down there, is still all factory. I have never touched the injector pump nor removed it. Alternator is still a factory item from what I know. Never had it replaced while I've owned it. Same as the power steering pump, that's all factory. The one part of the cooling system that I have replaced is the viscous coupling on the fan itself. So that failed on me at about 260,000 kilometers. And the only way that I noticed it, I was driving up a range, towing a vehicle with a trailer, and noticed that the temperature probably went up to about 3/4. So I made it up the range, I pulled up, and I sort of had a bit of a look around, and that's when I noticed that the clutch fan wasn't working to its optimal sort of performance. I sort of, was pretty lucky I didn't overheat the motor. I assumed that it'd been like that for a while. I just never really picked it up until I was actually towing a heavy load when the motor was working pretty hard. So they're about $200 off eBay, and took me about 3 to 4 hours to actually fit it. So yeah, I recommend you do keep an eye on yours, especially if you've got a Ranger that's over about 250,000 kilometers. Just check with your hand if it's got any sort of, free play in it. My one, you could basically turn it and it would spin. This one, you try to turn it and basically it stops straight away. So that's how you check for the operation of that. So all in all, it has been a pretty reliable car over the years. I must say that I drive my car pretty hard. It gets used for work purposes, so I'm constantly going on construction sites, new subdivisions, and all sorts of off-road driving. So it does get more of a beating than your sort of standard Ford Ranger would. So that's about a wrap up for this video. If you found this video informative, make sure you hit that like button so other Ford Rangers can find it and help them solve problems that they might encounter on their PX Ford Ranger.